Hello, everybody. This is the kind of like first real lecture for Intro to Anthropology. I apologize for some of the delays. It's just been crazy because this is the first time I've used Brightspace, obviously. It's the first time you've used Brightspace. It's also the first time I've used Zoom as the primary classroom for our classes. So forgive me for some of the confusion. But today we are just going to go over some of the kind of introductory elements of anthropology. We're going to introduce the four fields, okay? Please note, oh, sorry. Let's see, how do I do this? Nope, that's not what I do. Hold on. Please note that the reflection is due on Friday. It should not take you more than 10-15 minutes. It should be pretty quick. What's it called? The quiz, however, is due on Wednesday. So if you are watching this, please make sure that you submit something by Wednesday, even if it's, just to submit something. Because the way that the enrollment works is that I need to verify that you're participating in this class by Wednesday. If you have not submitted something, I cannot count you as participating, okay? I'll be also saying that out in an email. So yeah, but again, if you're watching this video, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. I know that you guys who are watching this are probably going to get stuff done, so it's not a big deal. But please make sure to, again, participate by submitting something by Wednesday, okay? If not, you will be dropped from this class. All right, so let's get into it. What are other academic fields that are similar to anthropology? Okay, at the beginning of each class, I like to kind of give you a general, kind of like a question to kind of get you thinking in the right direction of the lecture. Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to be talking about a lot of things. Anthropology, part of the reason why it's so confusing, and many of you probably don't know what anthropology is because it touches on a lot of stuff, right? And we're going to talk about what type of stuff in particular. All right. So anthropology offers a broader view, a distinctive comparative cross-cultural perspective. However, anthropology is much more than a study of non-industrial peoples. It is a comparative science that examines all societies, ancient and modern, simple and complex. Okay, this is from the textbook. And I think it's a pretty good description. Okay, it's in Google and Webster. It's a study of human societies and cultures and their development. It's pretty straightforward, right? So a more general term for anthropology is the study of humanity, okay? And that's going to become very evident as we go through the four fields, but anything related to humans, anthropology studies, right? Is it going to be in the same section of anthropology? Definitely not. But anything that's human related is going to be under anthropology. And that is part of the reason why it touches on so many different academic fields outside of itself, okay? Now, let's talk about this definition right here. A broader view, a distinctive comparative cross-cultural perspective, anthropology much more than a study of non-industrial peoples, is comparative science that examines all societies, ancient and modern, simple and complex. So again, that's a really kind of like a more thought out way of saying what I said, in that it studies anything related to humanity, right? The reason why they say it in this way, though, is because the most popular field of anthropology is probably archaeology. For those of you that are a little bit older, if you have heard of Indiana Jones technically was an archaeologist, granted, not a very good one. Tomb Raider, right, is technically an archaeologist. Again, technically not a very good one. But even though that's the most popular field of anthropology, there are three other fields of anthropology that are actually just as important, but maybe not as popular. Okay. So anthropology is the holistic, biocultural, and comparative study of humanity. It is the systemic exploration of human biological and cultural diversity across time and space, examining the origins of and changes in human biology and culture. Anthropology provides explanations for similarities and differences among humans and their societies. Okay, so this is, let me make sure this is recording because I do not want to do this again. Yes, is it recording? Hold on, give me 1 second. Let me just make sure this is recording. How do I do this? Okay, here we go. Is it recording? Nope, that's not the right thing. Here we go. Hold on. Now I just see myself on this. Okay, it is recording. Sorry. All right. So, sorry, give me a second. So, this is sounds very complicated, but it's not. Okay. Anthropology is the holistic, biocultural, and comparative study of humanity. Again, same thing. The point of this statement is to tell you that anthropology studies everything human related. Okay. It is the systemic exploration of human biological and cultural diversity across time and space. So there's three things there, right? The first thing is biological and cultural diversity, right? Now, the reason why it says in the beginning systemic exploration is because that's what makes it a social science, right? What is the main difference between maybe anthropology and area studies, such as African studies or Asian studies or Latin American studies? What's the main difference? It is the method in which they do the research, right? Systemic exploration. There's a different system of doing research for anthropology. Okay. Biological and cultural, again, just shows that it's covering a lot of different types of stuff across time and space. Wow, that sounds so intense. It is not that intense, right? Time and space, it's very simple. And let me explain to you. So let's say you're opening a pizza shop in Brooklyn, right? If you open a pizza shop in Brooklyn, is it going to be the same as opening a pizza shop in California? Is it going to be the same as opening a pizza shop in Japan? Is it going to be the same as opening a pizza shop in Mexico? Of course not, right? It'll be different for a variety of reasons, but the main point is that it is different, right? And that's why it's such an important thing to consider. Time is the same thing, right? Time is, if I were to open a pizza shop today, would it be the same as 4 years ago during COVID? Would it be the same as 20 years ago? Would it be the same as 50 years ago? Of course not, right? And because the time is different, there are, again, a number of different things that are going to be, that involve opening a pizza shop. But regardless, it is because of time that they are different. Okay. And that's what's important about time and space. Okay. Is that when you have time, it's depending what time you're studying, it's going to be different in the past, now, in the future, whatever. When you're talking about space, depending on where you are, it's going to change depending, again, on what place you're going to be at. Okay. Now, examining the origins of and changes in human biology and culture, anthropology provides explanations for similarities and differences among humans and their societies. So this is kind of an introductory level explanation of what anthropology is, right? It says it explains the similarities and differences among people, right? Yeah, that's kind of it at introductory level. But I think on a deeper level, it really talks about what it means to be human. What is it that's different from humans and non-humans? And like what are the limits of that line? Like at what point are we not human and what makes us human depending on what we're studying, right? So when we do anthropology, yes, it gives us understanding of what makes people different among, people all across the world, but it also explains what it means to be human. Okay. No? Yeah. Okay. So, some important points. All fields of anthropology consider variation in time and space. Each also examines adaptation, the process by which organisms cope with environmental stresses. Anthropology's biocultural perspective is a particularly effective way of approaching interrelations between biology and culture. Cultural forces mold human biology, including our body types and images. Okay. So the first sentence, you guys got that, right? Variation, time, and space, solid. They also examine adaptation. Okay. What is adaptation? It's the process by which organisms cope with environmental stress. So you know, when it's really cold, your body will do things to make it less cold, right? Maybe you have more hair, maybe you start shivering to create warmth, whatever, right? That is the more biological explanation of that. And yes, anthropologists do study that. However, one thing I want you to consider is also the cultural version of what adaptation is, right? It is very expensive to live in New York City. So what are the different things that New Yorkers do to keep up with that, right? For example, in New York, I guarantee you, this is not an official statistic, but it's from my own observation. There are more young people working in New York City than there are in, let's say, Minnesota. right? Because again, the financial pressure of Minnesota is not the same as New York, right? It is also no surprise that uh, uh, there's a lot more schools in areas, uh, like New York City and like San Francisco or whatever, because it's a big city, they have more money for it, but also there's a lot more people that need education, right? So this is a way that that city or that those people adjust to their city being so populated and having so much competition is they have a lot of colleges, for example, right? That is an example of social or cultural adaptation. Okay. So when we talk about adaptation, we're not just talking about biological adaptation, we're also talking about social and cultural adaptation. Anthropology's biocultural perspective is a pretty effective way of approaching interrelation between biology and culture. Cultural forces mold human biology, including our body types and images, right? So the reason why anthropology, of course, in my opinion, is such a powerful field is because it doesn't just consider one thing. And especially today, or especially, as things get more and more focused, right, we kind of separate biology from culture, which is normal because, we're only interested in one part of it. But it's important as anthropologists to look at, again, how are those things informing each other? And what's the line between something that is biological and cultural, right? So are you eating that way because we are biologically built like that? Or are you eating that way because you are culturally taught that way, right? These are questions that anthropologists, in my opinion, have the best answers to, right? And hopefully in this class, one of the main things you're going to learn about is what culture is, and how powerful it is in our day-to-day lives, right? Cultural forces mold human biology, including our body types and images. We're going to have a little example about that later, okay? So anthropology concerns itself with biology, society, culture, and language, which links anthropology to many other fields, sciences, and humanities. Okay, now we're going to go into the 4 fields. Social culture anthropology, that is my personal favorite. That is actually what I am, as a social culture anthropologist. Biological/physical anthropology, linguistic anthropology, and finally anthropological archaeology. And again, like I mentioned earlier, archaeology is the most popular one probably amongst all these different anthropologies. Okay. Oh, sorry. Technically, there are more fields than this that exist. However, they will always fall under one of these big 4, right? So for example, medical anthropology, it usually falls under biological anthropology or cultural anthropology, right? Or food anthropology, it usually falls under anthropological archaeology, like they're studying the food of people from 5,000 years ago, or social culture anthropology. How do bodegas affect day-to-day life of New Yorkers, right? These are different subfields of these main anthropological fields. Okay. So before we get into anything, let's talk about culture, right? We're going to talk about this again later on, but culture is that complex whole, which includes knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So what I want you to pay attention here is the word acquired, right? Acquired means what? It means to get, right? And it's something that essentially you're not born with, right? So that's a big part of what culture is. It's something that you're not born with. Okay. And the problem though with the word acquired, right, is one thing I don't like it is like, oh, if I acquired my iPhone, it means I have my iPhone. However, with culture, even though you have it, it doesn't stay still. It's not something that can be the same throughout history. It's always changing. Like no matter whether you like it or not, whether you think it's changing or not, it is changing all the time, right? So just be careful with that word acquired. And again, I just want you to emphasize, one, that acquired means it's something that you're learning after you're born, so it's not biologically passed on. And number 2, that even though you can use the word acquired for this, it does not mean you have it like forever. It means that you have it in the moment. Okay. What do I mean by that? I think a good example is I'm sure you or someone you know or your family or whatever are immigrants, right? When you leave a place for a year, and I don't mean just like across, overseas. I mean like even if you leave Iowa for a year, yeah, it's not going to change that much. But after you leave for 10 years, after you leave for 20 years, for 30 years, is it going to change a lot? Absolutely. And guess who's not a part of that change? You are not part of that change because you're living here. Does that make sense? And so culture is changing all the time, whether you know it or not. Now, if you were there, you wouldn't even notice that it's changing because you're just going with it. However, it is clear that it is changing all the time. Okay. All right. So social culture anthropology, again, my personal favorite. Cultural anthropology explores the cultural diversity of the present and the recent past. Ethnography and ethnology are kind of like the main methods of research, but ethnology is not really that important. Ethnography, however, is probably the most important. Ethnography is field work to collect data from a specific group or community. Okay, meaning what does that mean? That means that in order to do research on groups of people, right? And this group of people could be anything. It could be something a little more traditional like if you guys have ever heard of Margaret Mead, I believe there are quite a few schools in New York that are named after her. She's one of the first American anthropologists, by the way. She's pretty cool. Anyway, she did research on Samoan people, and she did research on everything from coming of age, gender and sexuality, their food, their language, all this stuff, right? The difference here with ethnography is that in order for these researchers to do research, they need to live with the people that they're researching, right? So it's not enough just to read a book. It's not enough just to visit them for a couple days. Like Margaret Mead lived with them for a very long time, right? And that's very important because again, when people, and many of you know this, when people base certain, look, when you read the New York Times, everyone here in this class lives in New York, right? How much of your life is represented in the New York Times? Not a lot, right? So would someone who's doing research on, let's say, Brooklyn, would someone that's just pulling their information from New York Times have a good understanding of your life? Absolutely not. And that's why in the case of ethnography, it's such an effective way of doing research because they are literally living with those people, right? And you might not understand everything, but you understand more things just from being with them. Okay. Now I'm gonna explain the next one. Not that important. Ethnology is basically a glorified book report. Okay. What happens with ethnology is, let's say I'm like a very high up professor and I have like three, PhD candidates under me and they're all doing research and I just take their information and just make my own book. Like, oh, this is, my book comparing their three researches. It's not that important. But ethnology is basically when someone takes the information from different sources, different anthropological sources, and then creates a publication or a book or an article or whatever out of it. Okay. So the one thing I really want to pay attention to is ethnography. And don't worry, like you don't need to get everything down here. We're going to go over it again when we go over that section on anthropology. Okay. So coming to the end here, what advantage would social culture anthropology have over other fields when researching other groups of people, right? Now, this is very simple. You get to know what they do from day to day. And when you get to know what they do from day to day, you understand more of how they think and their behavior and so on and so forth, right? So, and also you get a clear understanding of it while, usually again, if you read it from somewhere, it's not as clear. A great example is if I were studying what kids who are in 10th grade do in New York City versus what do kids in 10th grade do in Minnesota. If you were to just interview the kids, right, they would probably say, I go home after school. But as many of you know, there are many ways to get home after school in New York City, and you have to go through different things, right? Some people are driven home, some people are taking the school bus, some people are taking the MTA bus, some people are taking the train, some people are traveling all across the city. I saw someone that went to I used to work at a Tilden. It's called something else, a Tilden High School, but like they literally came from the Bronx. Like, yeah, you're going home right after, but if you get off at 3, that means you're not getting home till like 6, right? Anyways, so that's a big part of your going home process, right? You might get a slice of pizza at home on the way home. You might hang out with your friends. You might, I don't know, hit the bodega. You might get some Chinese food, whatever, right? You might do something on the way home. Okay. Now, if you are from, again, Iowa, I don't know why I keep on pooping on Iowa. It's just, this is a thing that I do, but hopefully no one's from there. Now, so you're in Iowa. What is your process of going home? You probably just get driven home, wait till the school bus home, and that's it. You get out at 3, you're probably home before 4, you're done. Dunzo, right? Now, even though both of those kids would say, I just went home after school, the experience between the two are very different. And the advantage of social culture anthropology is that they would investigate deeper as to what those words really mean, right? What actually happens day to day with that person. And that's very important for social culture anthropology. Okay. Now, what's another field of that studies people? Just think about historians, right? And again, historians do a lot of important work, but I would like again to illustrate that example with the New York Times. If I was doing a big research on how the Jewish community is in Brooklyn, right? And I just pull articles in the New York Times, is that going to be a great understanding of how the Jewish community lives day to day? Absolutely not. The communities, for example, in like Midwood, operates very differently than the communities in, I don't know, Borough Park, right? These are very, very important differences that if you just take from written sources, you're not going to be able to get. Okay. Very good. Next one, archaeology. Archaeology reconstructs cultural patterns, often of prehistoric populations. Archaeology focuses primarily on the archaeological record, material evidence of human modification of the physical environment, which includes stone tools, pottery, metalwork, textiles, and other technology. Okay, so basically, archaeology is studying people from the past. Okay, but and then we're going to talk about why it's a little bit different from bioanthro, but it's less about the science part of it and more about how they lived, right? So if you really think about it, it's actually social culture anthropology, but of people in the past, right? It's not, and yes, we have to know like how to, date bones and find the stuff in the ground, but really the goal of archaeology is to understand how our ancestors lived, right? Again, how our ancestors lived completely, okay? So that is the goal of archaeology, right? Reconstructing cultural patterns, often of prehistoric populations, okay? And they do so by finding things, right? Stone tools, pottery, metalwork, textiles, and other technology. Because obviously, unlike social culture anthropology, archaeology usually study peoples that aren't around anymore. And so they have to find other ways of getting the information. Okay. So although archaeologists usually cite the past, what are some ways people or cultures today can benefit from the research? Well, there's many of them, but one of the main things I want to illustrate is basically how things came to be, right? And I don't mean that in a general sense. I mean it in a specific sense. Have you ever asked yourself, how did we get to our place today of banking? Banking today is crazy. If you really think about what banking is today, it's crazy. It does not just hold your money. It invests money. It pushes out loans. How did the freaking electronic banking come about? Like how did it get to this point? Right. And so when archaeologists investigate the past, a lot of times they will find things that like, oh, there were these groups of people that held, jewels or something for, the rest of the population, whatever. How did it evolve into the banking that we use today? And also, one of the things that's very interesting is that it's very complicated, right? The fact that you can use your credit card in another country is nuts. That's crazy, right? Based off of what? Like what, you know what I mean? So these are the things that archaeologists can really give you insight on, right? Another thing is things like sewage, right? Sewers or whatever you want to call it, aqueducts, whatever you want to call it. For the longest time, we have had systems of getting our waste away from where we live, right? And if you think about technology like 50 years ago, right? We don't have computers, we don't have a lot of this stuff, but we had very good sewer systems. How did it become what it is today? Right? These are things that archaeologists will investigate, and it gives us insight to how things are today. Okay. Biological and physical anthropology. I'm not going to lie to you, this is not my strongest topic, but it is interesting. So, hopefully you guys will find it fun. Biological anthropology is a study of human biological diversity through time as it exists in the world today. Some examples of what they study are human biological evolution, human genetics, human growth and development, human biological plasticity, and primatology. That's my favorite one. Okay. So as you can see, they study a lot of things. Again, it's like it is biology, but the difference here is that it's focusing on human biology, right? Anthropology, everything human. Okay. So when we talk about this, right, anatomy changes, human migration, disease, the development of lactose enzyme to develop to digest milk and stuff like that. Our biological plasticity to deal with heat, cold, and altitude. What happens to our bodies when it's hot? We sweat. What happens to our bodies when it's cold? We shiver. What happens to our body when we're in high altitude, right? If you look at a lot of populations that live in high altitudes, their lungs are like literally bigger, right? These are all things that biological anthropologists study, right? How closely are we related to chimpanzees? Right, it's another thing that they study. Okay, so again, it's actually very clear. They study biology, but it's specifically the biology of humans. Okay. Now, as you can probably see, these two, archaeology and biological anthropology, go together really well, right? Because yes, the archaeologist will have some knowledge on how to analyze things they find in the ground, like how old is this bone that I found, or how, what is this, I don't know, metal pot made out of specifically. But most of the time, they will, for the in-depth analysis, they need to ship it back to a biological anthropologist to do a deeper analysis on what it is. Okay. Although this is probably your first time formally interacting with anthropology, where could you previously have learned about anthropological research but didn't know, right? Literally, if you've taken any class on human physiology, if you've seen Jane Goodall, well, for me, when I was younger, whenever there's like a substitute for my science class, they like roll in the TV and they play like a documentary about, about monkeys or apes or something like that. And there's a lady there that's always presenting. She's a primatologist. She's an anthropologist, right? Anytime you learn anything about human biology or human anything, it's usually going to be a biological anthropologist. But for clarity's sake, for simplicity's sake, right? They just called it biology. But in reality, they were biological anthropologists. Okay. All right, last one. Linguistic anthropology. Linguistic anthropology considers diversity among languages. It also studies how speech changes in social situations over time. They study languages. The study of languages reveals that cultural factors shape language use. Okay. So linguistic anthropology, it is different, similar to biological anthropology. It is different from pure linguistics, right? Pure linguistics is very focused on the language itself, the sentence structure, the grammar, the syntax, whatever, right? It's very focused on those things. However, linguistic anthropology, it does focus, don't get me wrong, it does focus on those things, but it focuses more on the surroundings, right? So for example, when a language is close to going extinct, right? Linguistic anthropologists will make it their mission to kind of maintain the language, or it'll be their project to do that, right? Because maintaining a language is not just about knowing the definitions of words, it's also knowing the context in which those words exist. If New York City was flooded, it was about to flood, and we all had to move out somewhere, right? What are some things that we would not be part of our language anymore, right? Whatever language you're using to describe the MTA, it's not going to be the same anymore. Pizza, not going to be the same anymore. The freaking, what's it called? The Holland Tunnel, right? Well, all these things are going to disappear because we lived in those contexts, and so we developed language to describe those contexts. And that's why the death of a language is so difficult, is because the reason why it's dying in the first place is because there's not a lot of people using it. And if there's not a lot of people using it, that means that there's a lot of things that aren't happening to have that language being used anymore. And that's why you need linguistic anthropology, because it tries its best to fill in the contextual things, the things that exist around the definitions of words. Okay. So in American English, what can you infer about American society, the difference of miss, misses, and miss, right? So let's say you're an anthropologist and you don't know anything about America, but you know that in America they have, different names for women, right? Depending on whether they're married or not. Okay. Miss, Mrs., and Miss, and then for men, Mr., right? What can you infer? What you can tell off the bat is that men and women are not even, right? They're not equal, right? Doesn't mean it's bad, doesn't mean it's good. But right off the bat, you can tell just by the language that they're using that men and women are not equal. And if you go a little bit deeper and you find out that Mrs. means that they're married, it means that our society values women that are married differently than women that are unmarried, right? And again, that's just from one little statement. That's just from one thing. You can tell that much about a society just from this one little sentence. Okay. All right. So In anthropology, there is two kind of like larger categories. One's academic and one's applied. Academic anthropology has the goal of discovering more about humanity and adding to the pool of knowledge that exists in anthropology. And applied is using the tools provided by anthropology to solve contemporary social problems. So this is not really that important for you to know, but well, it's not, you don't have to memorize it, but it's important for you to know. So academic, they both have pluses and minuses, right? Academic is more boring, but because it is more boring, it's more applicable to more things, right? Applied is more exciting, but because it's applied, it kind of has a direction, and so it's kind of because of its focus, it's not as well applied to everything else, right? And they both have their pluses and minuses. So academic is like kind of, you could think of it as more traditional, right? So when Margaret Mead, for example, went to Samoa, she didn't have like anything in her head about Samoa. She literally just went there, lived with them, learned their language, learned everything. And she learned so much that you literally could ask her to probably, I mean, she's famous for the coming of age stuff, but I guarantee you can ask her, you can ask her to write like a freaking book on their food, and she'd be able to do it, or on their language, she'd be able to do it, right? It's because she knows so much of it already. She just picked and chose what she wanted to talk about. But the problem with that is it's not very interesting until like 10 years later, right? Because she did all this research and like she decided, okay, the becoming a man or woman is very interesting, and then she published that. But unless you're into that, you're not really going to look at it, and it's just kind of like, dead research for a while. Applied is the opposite of that. Okay. Applied is if I went specifically to Samoa to do research on food, right? But the problem with my applied approach is that there might be 1,000 other interesting things, but I'm focusing so much on food, I'm going to ignore all those 1,000 other things, right? So pluses and minuses with academic and applied. Okay. Again, not too relevant to you guys because, again, you guys are just an introductory course, but if you do decide to pursue anthropology in the future, this does become kind of important. All right, so full circle. What other academic fields are similar to anthropology? So we went over a bunch of them, right? With social culture anthropology, history is very similar. English is very similar. All the social studies are very similar, right? And what separates them from each other, right? It's mainly, or sorry, all the area studies, right? African studies, Asian studies, Native American studies, whatever. They're similar, right? But what separates them? It is simply the way research is conducted, right? And as we learn in this particular section, ethnography is a specific and very effective way of doing, or I should say, a very specific way of doing research for social culture anthropologists. Okay. Archaeology, right? The digging up of like, stone tools and pots and pans and stuff like that. What is similar to that? A lot of people ask like, oh, are these like the people that dig up dinosaurs? No, they're not. Why is that? It's because dinosaurs, paleontologists, they don't focus on humans, right? So that means though that the paleontologists and the archaeologists are probably taking the same classes, right? But again, the focus is completely different. Okay. So paleontologists dig up dinosaurs, right? Dinosaurs were not around when humans were around, and thus archaeologists, anthropologists do not look at them. Okay. What's in this? Biological anthropology. There's a lot of things that are like literally biology is similar to biological anthropology. There's also like zoology where they study animals, right? That's also very similar to biological anthropology. But again, the difference is what? The difference is the focus on humans. Okay. And the last thing, linguistic anthropology. Linguistics obviously is a similar field of study, but when we're talking about linguistic anthropology, we're not just talking about the language itself, we're talking about the language in the context of how it exists. Does that make sense? And that's what separates it from other types of, or that's what separates linguistic anthropology with linguistics pure, right? Is that linguistic anthropology, even though language is a human thing, linguistic anthropology focuses on the human use of that language and how that applies. Okay, so I hope you guys found that relatively interesting. Again, I apologize for the bright space holdups. It's been kind of crazy. So make sure to turn in quiz 1 by Wednesday, and make sure to turn in reflection 1 by Friday. Okay. Usually everything will be due on Friday, but again, just for enrollment verification purposes, this will be due on the quiz will be due on Wednesday. All right. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at raymond.fong@kbcc.cuny.edu.